Not too long ago here on the channel, I talked about the January comic book sales that they posted on ICV2.com, but there's a little bit more to it on why DC Comics can't sell any characters outside of Batman. They haven't only priced them out, they've made a slew of really bad decisions. And here to talk with me about that is my good friend Josh McDonald from BatmanNews.com, also PopEyeCulture.com. He is the DC authority here on the channel. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing all right. You're mentioning these characters at DC other than Batman. Is that a real thing? Do other characters?
Well, there's
exist?
Nightwing, right, and Harley Quinn.
Well, there's definitely Nightwing. Yeah, he's around, and I think there's like a Robin or two somewhere. But these other people, I don't know who they are.
Interesting enough, I went back and I kind of looked at the last 3 to 4 years of sales, and constantly in the top 50 was always, besides Batman and Detective, Flash, Justice League, Action Comics, Superman, sometimes Green Lantern, Wonder Woman. Those were the kind of the titles that were consistently in there that were outside of Batman. And it's really interesting what they've done. A lot of these are self-inflicted wounds outside of just overpricing their Batman comics to where your DC fans have to make a decision. They've also really hurt the long-term viability of some of these characters with creative decisions and who they put on them. Key amongst them is Flash. Flash has always kind of been that character as a solo title right after Batman. He was actually consistently above Superman, always been a hefty seller. Not really that way. I kind of trace this all back to Heroes in Crisis. I think Flash fans don't feel like they can trust DC anymore.
Yeah, I think with Flash specifically, Heroes in Crisis definitely did a number on it because of what Tom King did with Wally West, and then it fell over into the Flash title, and they had the Flash Wars, I believe it was.
That was leading up to it. The very last issue, he goes off to Sanctuary. Okay,
that's it. Yeah, and I think the fact that Joshua Williamson had to kind of incorporate that in definitely soured some people to the book, and then you led into Future State shortly after, and I think that's where everything just completely just fell apart. So whatever momentum you had from Williamson, and even the New 52 run was not terrible either. I think you had like strong run after strong run, and then you had that, and it just seems to completely derail Flash's momentum. Pun intended.
It's like a 1-2 punch to comic book customers. We finally get Wally West back in Rebirth, and then they do that to him with Heroes in Crisis, make him essentially a murderer. They try to retcon a couple of those things away. Obviously Brett Booth and Scott Lobdell with their Flash Forward series. Williamson himself tried to do it with his finale of Flash when he left the series, but then right after that you get Future State Flash, where Wally West back. He becomes a serial killer again, and he kind of does some pretty dirty stuff to Barry Allen, and I just don't think there's any trust there, which is really kind of crappy because Jeremy Adams' Flash series right now, it's not about Barry Allen. It's all about Wally West, his family, and redeeming the character. And he's doing a great job. But Flash fans are just gun shy to come back in, even though there's a lot of quality there.
Yeah, there's a lot of quality there. I think part of it, too, is he's a relatively unknown name to general audiences. So people they don't feel they can trust his name. And I think the bad thing is it's going to be after the fact that people discover, oh, this run is solid, that they dip their toes back in. I've talked about this before about how publishers need to be very careful about the decisions they make, because I think they make decisions loosely and they don't realize how damaging a decision can be to a brand. And these characters are brands. They carry their own weight. And if you just completely just ruin something, it's going to take time to build trust back up. And the way DC's going, like they're doing it with multiple characters and they don't necessarily have that time allotted to them in a lot of ways.
Now, this next block of characters, I'll kind of attribute this to the Brian Michael Bendis effect. We'll talk about Justice League, Action Comics, and Superman. They brought in Brian Michael Bendis. Bendis is coming. We all saw the warning signs throughout our comic books. It turns out pretty much worse than we could have expected. But initially, Josh, there's a lot of interest. His Man of Steel series sells very well. The initial sales on Superman and Action with Brian Michael Bendis on the title are actually doing pretty well, but it really falls off quickly. He ages up John Kent, which I think pissed off a lot of people, insinuating that Lois Lane is sleeping with Lex Luthor, pisses a lot of people off, made a lot of wholesale changes, changed the kind of origin of Krypton and its destruction, put in a bunch of new characters to lead into this event Leviathan. Nothing takes off, and people just kind of got fed up with it. I heard about Superman fans dropping off the title after 60 years.
Yep. Yeah, I heard similar stories. I know friends. Actually, I have friends whose parents would actually read or collect Superman, and they actually stopped during this time period. It's interesting. I think, even when they were announcing Bendis is coming, I think people had reservations, but I think they also had some hope. I think sometimes you see that writers, when they leave one company and step into another, they kind of get rejuvenated again because they're having fresh material to work with. And I think we were hoping we were going to get that with Bendis, and we didn't. So Man of Steel, I think the sales you saw were more of an intrigue and a hope. And then as soon as it became clear that we weren't going to get that, you started to see that decline. And then again, egregious decisions were made. You mentioned them, and it guts the book. So
once again, we have Superman fans that are gun shy. The only way they were able to prop up Superman, Son of Kal-El into the top 50 once again was essentially to get worldwide exposure. I have doubts that Superman, Son of Kal-El will be the only DC title remaining in the top 50. I think it's just going to be Batman from here on out. Action Comics can't even sniff it. And the worst part is, Josh, Action Comics is really great right now under Philip Kennedy Johnson. This War World Saga is fantastic. Lots of quality, great art.
Philip Kennedy Johnson is doing incredible work on Action Comics, and nobody's reading it. And it's the same with Flash. It's Jeremy Adams. Jeremy Adams. There we go. I started to say Jeremy Scott. I knew that wasn't right. Jeremy Adams is doing The Flash. He's also doing incredible work. Both books, great books. Nobody's reading them. And DC is partly to blame here, not just from the mistakes they made in the past, but the fact that they're not marketing these books for what they are.
I think Bendis killed off a lot of the interest in Superman. Although Tom Taylor has brought some fans into Superman, Son of Kal-El. We'll see if it works long term. I have doubts. The other team is Justice League, which was very hot. They had a nice sales increase when Scott Snyder jumped on the book, obviously leading into Dark Knight's Death Metal. There was a nice, healthy, long run that he did.
Yep.
Some phenomenal artists out there. I don't like it as much as everybody, but there's some really good Superman content in that Justice League run.
Absolutely.
But as soon as he leaves the book, which doesn't coincide really with the beginning of Dark Knight's Death Metal, there's like a 4 or 5 month gap, which was really strange. They had no plan for the Justice League. Next thing you know, Robert Venditti's coming in for a couple issues. Joshua Williamson's coming in for a couple of issues. And you're like, well, what are they doing with the Justice League while all of this is happening? And then it's Brian Michael Bendis is taking over after Future State. There's crossover between Justice League and Superman. And they're like, I'm not going through this again. And the sales just died.
There was some drama. And again, this is going to be more so people that were in the know. There was some drama between Scott, Greg, and DC about what they wanted to do with it, and it leading into, at the time, 5G and, plans getting changed. And Scott got a little vocal about some of it, but he usually stays pretty respectful. But Greg made it very clear he was not happy with what was going on. And he didn't outright come out and say like, oh, this is bullcrap. But he definitely didn't act like Greg Capullo when Greg Capullo is excited about something. So he made it very clear, like, this is not the direction I want to go. And then they both kind of said, hey, we're stepping away from DC for a while. And I think you take that, and then the fact that you have a floundering book, so DC's trying to figure out what they're going to do until they get a plan. You have all these, writers come in, tell a quick story, and they leave. And then you announce Bendis, and it's like, yo, people are pissed from what he just finished doing with Superman. Why are you doing this? And that's definitely not going to help. It's like a 1-2 gut punch.
And they were able to kill off what are essentially kind of like flagship or tentpole type titles for him. Flash, Justice League, Superman, Action Comics. Those are some of their best long-term sellers. Another one that's out there that's interesting is Wonder Woman. They actually they did get an increase in readership when G. Willow Wilson took over the title. It was pretty healthy. Wonder Woman, I think, falls into and Green Lantern does too, I think falls into the Future State effect. I think Future State, for the most part across the board, was lackluster at best and very poor in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of people just kind of decided to step back. I want to see what DC Comics are going to be doing. Who are they bringing in? They really didn't bring anybody of note in on these titles. Wonder Woman, I think, is Michael Conrad and Becky Cloonan. So we've got Cloonrad on this. One of the worst creative teams as far as writers to put on a book. And the sales just tanked, and they can't recover I think people are waiting for something to dip their toes back into DC on. So I think not only did they have these creative decisions with Justice League Action and Flash that didn't work out very well in their favor, but Future State and not bringing in big name talent has really killed other titles like a Wonder Woman. And in Green Lantern's case, I think there was an enormous bait and switch. But Wonder Woman's, that's a terrible thing to have happened because they're leading into like the first Wonder Woman event at DC Comics in like 20 years.
It's really interesting because if you go back to when they announced Future State, the conversations around it was very clear that like, okay, this is going to be another convergence. It's going to last for like 2 months to kind of,
it's going to be temporary.
It's going to buy some time. And then, at the time that they were announcing Future States and during solicitations, the conversation that was going on within the comic fan community was, okay, well, cool, we'll get through this. We can't wait till I think March solicits or April solicits, whichever one it was going to be, come out so we can see who's really going to be on these books going forward. And then they come out and it's the same creative teams as the Future State. And people are like, what the fuck is this? And I think that was kind of like the first nail in the coffin. But you also have this instance of people were openly like, I'm not going to read Future State. And the moment you take out that monthly habit of buying a book, it's so much easier to say, I don't need this book. Or I actually picked this up instead and I prefer it. So I'm just going to stick with it. So I think that's where you see that like double-edged sword of like, you didn't have great creative teams. You kept the less than stellar creative teams. And then you gave people a chance to stop buying the books.
What they didn't do was give people a chance to stop buying Batman books because in Future State, everything shuts down, right?
Yeah.
Except for Batman, because you still got all the Black Label Batman books and you still got some other miniseries going on. So people didn't, the Batman fans still got their fix that wasn't tied into Future State.
It wasn't. And, another thing with Batman 2 is it didn't feel like it was stopping its momentum and then restarting because James Tynion picked up after Tom King. He did, I think, 2 arcs. Within those 2 arcs, it was initially he was going to end the run and then someone else is going to pick up. And then those plans changed. So he kept going. So he got to continue his story on where every other book pretty much ended its story and then started fresh. So for him, that was a plus. That was a win for Batman. That's probably why you saw so much success. Now, looking back, I think people don't look as highly on Tynion's run, but at the time it was fresh. People had a reason to check out the book and buy it. So it had that benefit of a continued plot thread.
Wonder Woman is nowhere near the top 50. And I think Trial of the Amazons could be awful. When you look at the talent associated, you got Clunrad, Stephanie Williams, Vita Ayala, and then you have Joelle Jones, who's a fantastic artist. World-class artist. Same with Becky Cloonan, not a great writer. So you have like the blind leading the blind on this Wonder Woman event series that I just think they better have some really good ratio variants if they want to actually sell this comic book. You know what I'm saying?
Oh man, yeah, no. Even then, I don't know if it's gonna sell as well as they hope.
The other title that really I think had been strong in the past was Green Lantern. I love Robert Venditti. He's my favorite comic writer. But when Grant Morrison took over the Green Lantern title, there was a big spike in interest in sales on that title. People actually came back for the second season, and it was doing pretty good. It was quite healthy as far as the sales. As soon as he steps away, they put in Jeff Thorne, somebody not a lot of people know. I know he was out there making the rounds trying to get the word out. And then he was selling a Green Lantern book. And as you were looking at the covers coming out of Future State, that wasn't the characters he was talking about. He was talking about John. And we're seeing, JoJo Mullen's fine ass in Green Lantern on other covers. And it felt like there's an enormous bait and switch. So I think in that case, they kind of ended up screwing themselves not only with Future State, but then the bait and switch aspect of that Green Lantern book and no Hal Jordan in it. He finally did arrive not that long ago, but
and this is another case too where it's like you had a little bit of a drama there before the book came out that kind of derailed the book. So it's like you already don't have a well-established name carrying the book, so that's gonna hinder some people. And then you have this drama coming out where it's announced that he doesn't like Hal Jordan, or he doesn't care for Hal Jordan as a character. So that creates like this whole shitstorm. And then, Jeff was good enough to go on Purchase Channel and actually do an interview and talk about it and explain himself. And for me, listening to him talk, I was like, all right, like this guy seems pretty level-headed. I'll give him a chance. And then you have these moments where like he's speaking to like, this is what my book's going to be about. And exactly what you talked about. You start getting covers that show the complete, different direction. And again, that was something that DC editorial decided that Thorne had no control over or play in, but it definitely did not help his book. Like they were pushing some characters, Teen Lantern, Bendis, that people don't like. They don't want to see her. They don't want to read about her. And then she's like slapped on cover after cover after cover. So why would people pick up that book?
DC Comics have stepped on their own dick so many times, and that's what's really hurt the other characters outside of Batman. There is one character we need to talk about, Josh, that portends good thing or at least hope for some of these other characters. DC made a terrible decision getting rid of Dick Grayson and replacing him with Rick Grayson when he got shot in the head. Fuck you, Tom King. We just get this terrible, never-ending Rick Grayson story. Finally, James Tynion comes in there like, no, we're bringing Dick Grayson back. They put a pretty big name creator on it, Tom Taylor. I don't like what he's doing over at Superman Son of Kal-El, but his Nightwing's been pretty good here and there. I don't think it's really gone anywhere, but there's some good ideas put in there, and they put a nice artist, Bruno Redondo, that's worked with them in the past, and sales have recovered. It's back into the top 50 where it wasn't before because of that awful Rick Grayson story. So you can fix these characters, but you need to understand what people liked about them to begin with, kind of get back to that, and then you need to back it up with somebody that people have confidence that's going to deliver a story that they want to read.
They did what they did with Dick Grayson by turning him into Rick Grayson. That wasn't the original plan. There's been conversations about this. Tom King was actually real quick to say like, hey, Rick Grayson was not my idea. Was shooting him my idea? Yes. But the whole point was he was going to have to work with Tim to, retrain to get back to where he needs to be, which honestly, I think could have been a great read. Especially if it was Percy writing it, I think it could have been handled pretty well. But they went the Rick Grayson route completely. Again, it went on way too long. It ruined the character to some degree. Tynion comes in, he corrects it. You do get two relatively reliable names from the DC standpoint anyways, and Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo, and they start off with excellent work. So it's like, oh, great, we can trust in this. But even now, DC's like, I'm not going to say stepping on their dicks again because they're not that big, but they're fucking up again because they're just derailing the story right and left.
Every time there's an event or crossover story,
it's just like give the people their books. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Blockbuster and Nightwing's sister and Heartless and all this stuff that you've incorporated and set up as the main plot points of your Nightwing story aren't important anymore. Got to toss them out and get into the Batman event.
Yep. It's Batman event and Fear State, and then now we're dealing with a crossover with Son of Kal-El, and I'm just like,
and they got a Flash one coming up too.
And you got a Flash one coming up. Yeah, it's frustrating as a reader. It's frustrating, especially when you connect with something that you're enjoying for the most part.
But readers are willing to forgive them and come back after something even as atrocious as Rick Grayson. I do think Heroes in Crisis and what they did to Wally is far worse. And Flash fans you're gonna have to do more to get Flash fans back. But you can rehabilitate these things. It doesn't take a whole lot. You just have to tell people the right thing and then back it up with good creative and actually tell them the stories that they're looking for.
Yeah, no, completely agree. But they also have to take time to let that sit in, and they don't seem to let that happen.
Definitely not. So we'll see what happens with Dark Crisis. There's going to be some changes, hopefully. Someone recognizes why DC Comics sales are like this, and they can't get anything really besides Batman in the top 50. And some of these other characters that would have been mainstays in the top 50 for years can finally get back in there. And they definitely need to get some better, bigger name creatives to come in here and back up these titles because, I could tell everybody in the world how great Flash is, but nobody trusts Jeremy Adams yet.
No.
I recently looked at the January sales analysis for DC Comics. I break kind of all the numbers down where DC's making a lot of mistakes. It has a lot to do with Batman. If you haven't seen the numbers, they're going to scare the crap out of you, but this is a video you need to see.